Okay, so I think we have talked about the population theories. We have to talk about the migration, and as we have seen that there are two types of migration we have to study. Migration from the perspective of paper 1 and paper 2. So first we are going to talk about the case of international migration. If we look into the previous year questions which have been asked on this topic, one of the questions which has been asked has been with respect to the recent patterns of international migration. Now, this term makes it a bit complicated. Recent. If it was contemporary, I would have gone for period beyond after 1970s. What has happened with what has been the migration trend? If the term was contemporary. But because the term is recent, we are not very sure what this term recent actually includes. For me, recent can be the very recent thing, or this recent can also be long period of time. For example, if I look into ancient, medieval and modern, modern would become the recent. So the term recent has more subjectivity compared to the term contemporary. Contemporary is immediately the same time period that we are talking about. So we'll not take risk and we'll talk about the modern period, how the migration has panned out in the world. We'll be focusing upon this modern period. So if we look into the modern or the recent international migration, the most important trend of this recent international migration started with the Renaissance period. You can understand, अभी तक जो हमने देखा है, one thing is pretty much clear, that there has been evolution of the human beings in Africa, what scientists believe. Somewhere probably Ethiopia, and from there they migrated. There were great migration periods, and through this migration, human beings got distributed in the rest of the world. This migration would have definitely occurred in the ancient period. Later on, as civilizations were formed, many of the civilizations captured newer areas, and that also followed the migration trends. So, like for example, there was migration in India of the Muslims during the medieval period. So we find that such type of migrations also occurred. But we are not too much concerned about those historical streams of migration. We are more concerned about what happened in modern period. So in the modern period, we find that the biggest migration stream was associated with the European migration which occurred after the Renaissance period. Very clearly you can understand that Europeans, in Europe, there was a period of medical breakthrough, medical technology breakthrough, as a result of which the mortalities got lowered. There was industrial revolution, there was urbanization, number of things occurred in Europe. And there was a kind of a period of overpopulation when there was lots of unemployment, lots of problems were there in case of Europe. During this period, the Europeans sought to find out new world, newer resources. And in this attempt, they found out number of areas where they could establish themselves. So one of the biggest migration episodes which occurred was this discovery of the Europeans when they found out newer world. And we'll see that in this newer world there were two type of trends. One migration stream was towards the tropical coastal lands of the tropics, starting from the Americas, Caribbean, and later on also in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. So it was towards the tropical lands, coastal tropical lands. But you can understand Europeans were adapted to the temperate climates. So there they were just going for some financial profits. And the financial profits were mainly in the form of plantation industry. Plantation crops were in large demand in Europe, and as a result of which what they did, they established their own plantation crops in these areas. Very clearly you can understand initially the labor would have been brought from Europe, but the European labor would have been what? Can I say costly? It would have been costly and not very much efficient because it had to work in tropical humid climates which it was not adapted to. Thus what we find later on, this European labor was actually replaced by slave trade which was occurring from Africa. And there was huge migration which occurred from Africa towards these tropical coastal lands in the form of slaves. As you know that Europeans established their colonies in Africa, and from there this slave trade was taking place. Further later we will be finding that even slavery was abolished. So once the slavery was abolished, now this supply of labor continued in the form of indentured labor. It was a kind of semi-slavery. And now the supplier countries were different. Supplier countries, Africa was still one of the supplier region, but other supplier regions emerged like that of India, Asian nations, from where you'll be finding India has large diaspora in number of these countries, tropical countries, Caribbean for example. So again, majority of this diaspora went there when? During the British period. Okay? So again, we find that this was one stream of migration. But equally significant stream of migration was that of Europeans who migrated towards the newly found temperate lands. And in these temperate lands, what they did, they established themselves, they made their home. They migrated and ultimately they started to live there. And we find that it is one of the biggest migration streams of the world. We'll see a number of things followed, atrocities on the natives were killed by them, and these lands ultimately became their own. So in this manner what we find, there was two very important migration streams which affected the world. So if we talk about international migration, two type of migration we have seen, pull-based, push-based. So largest historical stream, Europe from North America, or Americas you can simply say, North America not included. Push-based, involuntary, dominant phase followed by wars and natural hazards like Jews, Holocaust, caste, India, Pakistan partition, we'll see a bit. Historically migration has been what? Pull-based. Majority of migration historically has been pull-based, where people sought newer lands. But you tell me, can I say this, even during that period, because the wars were there, etc., there was push-based migration streams from time to time, which were there. In recent time, the pull-based migration has slowed down. Why it has slowed down? Because now there is emergence of nation states. There is emergence of the concept of political boundaries, international boundaries, and the related laws and visa regimes. So no country would allow you to enter if you are not the citizen of the country. As a result of which now the migration, international migration which occurs, it is what? It is more restricted than it was previously. If we look into the major streams of international migration, largest international migration began in the 17th century and it continued into 18th, 19th centuries, and this was mainly the period of European overseas expansion. So European overseas expansion, new discoveries through voyages and increased possibilities of exploiting new world and relieving the northwestern Europe from the acute pressure of population. हमने देखा है migration occurs from overpopulated to underpopulated or optimum populated regions. So this triggered the largest stream of migration in human history from the old world to the new world. Such a migration had two different directions. One was to sparsely populated tropical and subtropical coastal lands. This was one stream of migration. And other easily accessible areas, mainly due to economic reasons. Again, it was, if you remember, Ravenstein very clearly talked about that when it comes to the long distance migration, medium distance migration, the primary reason is the economic reasons. Okay? So again, here we find that why he was saying, because historically it has been true. Economic reason was the primary factor. And what was the economic reason? The cultivation or production of exotic crops due to warm, humid climates, commercial production of sugarcane, tea, tobacco, spices flourished in the coastal lands of America, from Virginia to Brazil. All these coastal lands were ultimately colonized and plantations were developed along these areas. Okay? So that is the first migration stream which occurred towards these areas. Now, such a stream of migration generated other streams as well. Why these other streams were generated? To meet the demands of labor. And initially the demand of labor, the cheap supply of labor would have come from Europe itself. Like for example, Irish, Scottish. So there were a number of areas which were poor. As demand rose, slave trade from Africa became the second major stream. So from African land to the coastal Americas. But we very well know that slavery was later abolished in the 19th century, due to which the densely populated countries of Asia were exploited by the British and Dutch. Thus a semi-slave trade began to supply labor to newly developed plantations of Fiji, Mauritius, Sumatra, Caribbean, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, East Africa, so many places. We find that newly developed plantations were there. So this was the one very important stream of migration. Second very important stream of migration was towards temperate grasslands. Yes, it is bonded labor. Temperate grasslands, which were sparsely populated, attracted European settlements. Thus, migration occurred into temperate zones of North America and South America, including, for example, Argentina, Chile, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, North America, which included Canada, US, all those areas. This stream constituted one of the most important migratory movement in human history. Around 20% of Europe's total population migrated in this stream, to these directions. So what has happened by this time, by the end of these centuries, what was happening now? The concept of nation states began to emerge. 19th century had become dominant. That limited the pull-based migration to some extent. Later on, the major streams of international migrations were push-based. Biggest streams. We are finding that in one occasion, when we are saying this later on, we'll see that still the pull-based migration is the maximum number of people moving, if you look into the total amount. But one stream, large number of people moving, it has been the case of what? More push-based migrations, streams. World War I gave birth to, for example, later different causes were there, and one of the cause of migration was the World War I. So World War I gave birth to forced migration. This migration led to resettlement and readjustment of population within Europe. And from where to where? Eastern Europe towards Western Europe. For example, 1 million plus Russians were forced to leave Russia following the Russian Revolution. Similarly, large number of people was displaced from Eastern Europe like Poland, Czech Republic towards Western Europe. Because ultimately Russia, later on the Soviet Russia colonized many of these areas. So many of them had to flee these countries and move towards Western Europe. So this was one occasion which gave rise to large-scale migration. Next major juncture in international migration was the period of Great Depression of 1930s. And number of streams emerged, but very important stream emerged from Europe to newly formed USA. And for example, there was a potato crisis, it was a famine in Ireland. And it was so strong that it forced almost 1/3 of Irish population to migrate towards North America, Anglo-America, that is Canada and US. Okay? So this was another important juncture. Starting with the period of 1930s, when ultimately Hitler became powerful in Germany. Another stream of migration started, and this was the Jews Holocaust, which was done by the Nazis, created more than 1 million refugees as they left Germany to escape the Nazi persecution. ठीक है? So अभी इंडिया में भी ऐसा ही करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. हंसने की बात नहीं है. This is going to be very bad. If they succeed in their intentions, it is going to be very bad. And we, as the people, when we will become old, we will have no answers to our children. Why we allowed them. This has happened in Germany. You meet German people and they are ashamed of what happened. How they were not able to control. It always starts with this type of fanatism, which is right now we find in case of India. We have to be vigilant, we have to be sure. बहुत बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है राइट नाउ. फॉर एग्जांपल इलेक्शंस एंड दिल्ली में यू विल बी फाइंडिंग कि हम इतने ज़्यादा हिपोक्रिट्स हैं. वी आर सो मच हिपोक्रिट्स, वी आर सो मच गाइडेड बाय आवर एंसेस्ट्रल थिंग्स. वी कंटिन्यू. हमारे एंसेस्टर्स, हमारे पेरेंट्स का लाइफ टाइम अलग था. दे एक्सपीरियंस डिफरेंट थिंग्स. वी आर एक्सपीरियंसिंग डिफरेंट थिंग्स. You don't have to just continue with that. You just have to create your own ways. लेकिन ऐसा होता नहीं है. अगर मिश्रा, शर्मा, पांडे, अग्रवाल, तो पता है कि वोट कहां जाएगा. अगर सिंह है तो वो डिस्ट्रीब्यूट हो जाता है. It is something like this. You have to change the trends. Then only we can prosper. Otherwise these leeches would keep on flourishing, they would keep on enjoying, okay? And we will suffer, we'll just suffer. I have suffered economically so much in this regime, so much in this regime. Okay. During the World War II, about 18 million people from Central and Eastern Europe crossed international borders and moved towards West Europe and Russia. This was the area, Central and Eastern Europe, which was most affected by the World War. It was the area which was tried to be occupied by Hitler. You must be aware, we have talked about that, the organic theory of Ratzel. It became the base of the Hitler's idea. Hitler felt that he had the right to exploit these weak nations. And again, it was fight actually for the colonies which was taking place. And Germany had no access to the colonial resources. while other countries like French had their own territories, British had their own territories. Okay? So other Dutch had their own territories, but Germans, because they were defeated in the First World War, they were not allowed this kind of territorial expansion. And Hitler felt that it was not right, it was not correct, because Germany was seen to be the birthplace of the Aryan race. And again, Germany had something of kind of divine qualities which were to be exploited, and by doing so they were denying the rights of the Germans, and that became the base for Hitler to expand his territories in Europe itself. He clearly targeted the areas of Eastern and Central Europe. So again, what we find, that was the time period when lots of problems happened, and so much big numbers, 18 million people from Central and Eastern Europe crossed international borders and moved towards West Europe and Russia. In 1947, the division of Indian subcontinent forced about 15 million people to move from one part of the subcontinent to another. So we know India and Pakistan were formed, and there was large scale displacement of people from across the border. Similarly, in 1948, the formation of Israel caused forced migration of about 1.5 million Palestinian refugees to other Arabian countries. This was the period when Israel was formed. Okay? With the formation of Israel, large-scale migration occurred. Gulf War of 1990s further gave rise to migrations. You can understand, see, the period after the First World War, there was formation of League of Nations. And with the formation of League of Nations, we find that that was the first period when the international laws began to have their some say. And this is the period we'll be finding that ultimately territorial expansions, etc., were less, or not less, they were tried to be restricted. Although it was not so much successful, but one thing which was successful was some international laws emerged which restricted the migration. After the formation of UN, it has become even stronger. So the concept of nation states is now very established, and there are so many international laws which are present. UN did the same mistake which was there in the League of Nations. When the United Nations was formed, it clearly recognized that there are some powers who, if not given proper rights, they would walk out. And because of that walkout, like League of Nations, United Nations would also fall. And that was the basic reason you can understand that the veto power was essentially given to some of these countries. Whatever be the discriminatory nature of veto power has actually allowed these nations to continue with the United Nations because they are privileged bunch. And because of this, ultimately they can veto. If something is against their interest, they can simply veto it. And they are safeguarded against a united international community. So that veto has actually allowed the success of United Nations. And that has had good impact on, restrictive impact on the migrations, the pull-based migrations that we are talking about, as international laws are now very much established. So we will be finding that particularly after this period, 48 and all these periods, after that when the United Nations became very established, we will be finding that actually the number of people migrating, it reduced. And later on, the biggest streams of migrations actually have been associated with what? They have been associated with some uncertainties, some wars or such type of problems which have been there. For example, one of such big problem arose in the 1990s, which caused large-scale migration in the Middle East. So again, you know very well, like for example, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and as a result of which there was large-scale migration which followed towards Iran and several other countries. So that was one juncture of such migration which occurred. later on we find that there was other things, like for example, in recent times there was this Afghanistan war. Again we will be seeing that Afghanistan war, large number of Afghani, more than 1 million Afghani, they had to migrate towards where? As refugees, they had to migrate towards Pakistan. The northwest frontier province of Pakistan has similar characteristics like Afghanistan. So they crossed international borders and ultimately went towards Pakistan. Similarly, such type of events have continued. अभी देखते हैं उसको. The more recent events of such migration we'll see. But that is how ultimately the migration has taken place. Now, if we look into the contemporary migration, how contemporary migration has occurred. So I can simply say contemporary migration has been mostly related with what? Post 1950s migration, how it has taken place. More specifically, more post 70s migration, how it has occurred. So the contemporary international migration has had number of streams. One of the basic aspect was the case of voluntary migration. And second has been the case of involuntary. Voluntary migration and the involuntary migration. So if we look into the case of voluntary migration, what we find in the voluntary migration is that there has been number of things which has risen, and one very important thing is that one type of migration is such type of migration which we can call it as the legal migration, and the second one is the illegal migration. So two type of voluntary migrations can be seen, legal and illegal. Now even within legal we can talk about two further subtypes. One subtype of migration is when migrants are allowed as future citizens. Migrants are allowed as future citizens. So this is one type of migration which is there. And second, if you talk about where we find that second type is where migrants are allowed with temporary work permits. When migrants are allowed with temporary work permits. So this is one other type of migration, international migration, which has been very common in present times. If you talk about the case of illegal migration, we'll see that there has also been cases of illegal migration where without the legal sanctity, without the legal permission, migrants have entered into the countries. Okay? Many type of illegal migrations we can talk about, like for example two types even within this category. One is where secretly the migrants are crossing the borders, like for example very frequently happening from Mexico to US. That is one case of illegal migration. But there is another type of illegal migrants who actually entered in this second category, and later on when their visa expired, then also they did not return. Okay? So that is the second case of illegal migrants. We'll see. So that is illegal migrants. Involuntary migration is essentially the case of refugee migration. And again here we can talk about refugees due to two causes: human-made causes and natural causes. Although actually in reality में all these causes are human-made. There would be superimposition of natural factors, but you cannot say that it is entirely natural, because human activity would always be there. So this is the framework of writing the contemporary international migration that you have to keep in mind. इसमें इसी तरह से लिखा है. So recent international migration streams में देखते हैं. The nature of international migration has undergone a change. In general, pull-based voluntary migration has declined. Has declined, primarily due to strict laws and visa regimes. Also, there is clear north-south divide in migration. And what is the north-south divide in migration? The north, which is the developed world, acts as the major destination, while south, if you talk about, which is the developing world, constitute the largest source region for migration. Okay? So this is one case which has very clearly emerged. And when we are saying north, you know very well the north is the first world that we are talking about. However, even in the present scenario, the push-based migration streams following wars, political instability have caused large-scale displacement of people. Like, compared नहीं होना चाहिए यहाँ पर, like the earlier streams. Like the earlier streams. Although small in number, the contemporary migration is of great importance for certain countries, particularly those countries which lie in the fifth stage of demographic transition as the chief source of demographic change within these countries. Okay? So it is very, very important for these countries. See, it is not only important for these countries. It is important for all the countries. India may, suppose India and China, we'll find that these countries promoted their migrants to go abroad. You can see that this India celebrates the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Same is, this concept was actually borrowed from China. China was the first country to make these celebrations. They could very clearly see that the diaspora which is going across the world, how in future it would influence their policies, how it would have so much of advantage, how it would bring lots of information technology, how it would bring lots of remittances and other resources. Okay? So they could very clearly foresee that in future it would be very beneficial, and that is why they began this celebration. अब वही सारे लोग इंडिया में ही रह जाते, ऑलरेडी इतना अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट है. You can understand how we would have managed. They are very important source of remittances. Okay? So again, you can understand that it is not only beneficial for the developed world, it is also beneficial for the developing world. Because Indians, you can see that there is so much large Indian diaspora in other parts of the world. When there is elections in United States, can I say this Indian diaspora has a very big influence in the elections, and any party which comes to power, it cannot neglect, or wants to come to power, cannot neglect this diaspora. Indian diaspora, the Chinese diaspora. So always they are trying to woo this Indian diaspora or the Chinese diaspora, and they would try to have what? One of the ways is to have good relationship with their native country. Okay? No matter what, people will always be emotionally attached. We cannot blame them that they went. We can say that we were unable to provide the requisite opportunities to them. They were skilled. Many of them, majority of them were skilled. And we failed to provide them. Like for example, you find that in all these scientific organizations, research organizations, so many Indians are working. अभी तो ऐसा ट्रेंड है कि ऑलमोस्ट ऑल जितने बड़े बड़े ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस उसमें एक एमडी समथिंग लाइक एक इंडियन जरूर मिलेगा. ठीक है. सो अगेन this was a very good human resource. We could not use that human resource. It is our mistake. ठीक है. When I am saying this कि it is our mistake, उसमें कुछ लीचर्स भी हैं अक्षय कुमार जैसे, तो you can understand they would be like too much. सब कुछ यहाँ पर है, फिर भी कैनेडियन सिटीजनशिप है, एंड पेट्रियोटिज्म तो खून में ऐसे भरा हुआ है कि कोई हिसाब नहीं है. ठीक है. बट आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट दोज टाइप ऑफ पीपल. जनरल the NRIs which are there, they have emotional attachment with the Indian land, and that is why they are important. Whatever be the case, we are saying that they are important for these countries, but we have to understand not only for these countries, for the other countries as well, the ones which are sending them. A distinction can be made here between those have legal sanction of the receiving countries, those whose status is considered illegal by receiving countries, and those who have been admitted as refugees. So three type of international migrants we find. So legal migrants की बात करें सबसे पहले, दो कैटेगरीज है जैसा हमने बोला. Potential citizens in future by conferring the citizenship. So a common type of migrants within the developed world है. So you tell me, if I have to think about this type of first type, when migrants are allowed as future citizens, which of the countries would like such type of future citizens? Can I say that these countries would be those who have reached the fourth or fifth stage of demographic transition? That means mostly, can I say, the destination of the destination would be what? Can I say the destination would be the first world? That means the destination countries would include Canada, USA, West Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, Japan. So first world countries, can I say some of the second world countries like Russia? ठीक है. Some second world countries like Russia. ठीक है. So all these would be what? They would be the main destination countries. They require more number of people because their labor force is shrinking, which they see very clearly is going to be highly problematic for the future. So now what to do? They are basically trying to allow more number of people, migrants. Now, problem is that if you allow too many migrants of different race, there are three main types of races: the Caucasoid race, the Negroid race, and the Mongoloid race. Okay? So, Caucasoid is the European race, the white race. If you allow too many migrants from other race, then what will happen? The texture of the population would be changing. No country would want to do that. Also, you can understand that if a migrant is going, like Indian migrant, like other Mongoloid migrant, can I say they can be easily recognized that they are different people? They can be easily recognized. Can I say in that case the assimilation of the migrants is difficult, is going to be a difficult task? The natives would not be ready to accept. But if the migrant is of the same color of the skin is the first thing that one would see. Can I say that it would not matter to the natives? Natives would see them as their own. they cannot recognize. If the language is same, you tell me, can I say it would be easy for the natives? If you talk about if the religion is same, for example, again it would be easier for the migrants to assimilate. Thus what will happen, we find that this type of migration, you tell me, can I say, does this type of migration would be mostly north-north migration? It would be an example of what? It would be mostly an example of north-north migration. It has been an example of the case of north-north migration. That means if these are the destination regions, the sources have been what? The sources has been number of areas. Very important source has been the case of Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe has been one of the main sources. Eastern Europe has been in turmoil for a very long period of time. It has been characterized by political and economic instability. As a result of which, here people are educated, they have similar characteristics, similar traits, but ultimately what we find that they are not so much economically secured. Geopolitical or political instabilities are found in their countries. People definitely want to live a better life, more stable life, so they prefer to move towards either Western Europe or towards the Anglo-America. Okay? Similarly, if you talk about others like migration taking place from other such type of migration, so now first is this stream. So you can see Western Europe and North America, Europe and Australia, all these are examples of this. So that is the first case, north-north migration. So इसका एक stream क्या है? It is the case of north-north migration. If we look into, for example, this is the top 10 regional movement in millions, which was there in 2015. Now, if you look into the total, and this is almost a period of 15 years period it is, can you see one of the very important migration which occurred, migration streams which occurred was, can you see almost 23 million people moved between where Eastern Europe and Central Asia, that was developing part of this, towards the Eastern Europe and Central Asia developing. Even within those countries, within them they were distributed. Okay? Can you see another very important was about 10 million people from this Eastern Europe and Central Asia developing to the Western Europe. This was very, very important stream of migration which has occurred in recent times. Okay? Another stream of migration, can you see Western Europe to Western Europe? It is how much? About 12 million people have redistributed within these countries. Each of these countries want what? Same race people to come and live in their country. So they would be attracting. That means when we are saying here that West Europe is a destination, but West Europe is also source. Because many people from West Europe, they move towards North America. Many people from Western Europe, from one country within Western Europe, they are moving towards other countries of Western Europe. Okay? So it is also one important source of migrants which are moving. So what we are trying to say, this type of migration, most dominant form of migration is north-north migration. It is to be expected because South को जरूरत नहीं है citizens की, already उसके पास बहुत सारे citizens हैं. So they don't need future citizens. Already they have too many people. They are underdeveloped. They cannot take care of their own population. So why they would want more citizens? Okay? So this is mostly north-north migration stream which is there. Why? Because you can understand that it would be like north destination समझ में आ गया, और source इसलिए है क्योंकि they don't want other characteristic, other races to come and live in their country. Some of these, however, have also been cases of south-north migration. Some of these, only limited streams. Like for example, one of the streams has been, which has developed in recent times. It is developing now, that in recent times, some of these countries have allowed the people from south to go there and live there. Like for example, one of the aspects have been Japan as the destination country. Okay? And towards Japan, number of countries are supplying them, like migrants coming from other East Asian countries. Other country which has become important supplier in recent times has been India. Okay? And what they are doing, because Japan actually requires, it has acute shortage of people. You can understand that because of that they are allowing ultimately they are developing robotics, etc. So much acute shortage of people they have. And if they don't tackle this problem, it is going to be a big problem in future. Majority of population is old age. Now, future, who will work, who will pay the taxes? This has become a very big issue in Japan. So now they have become more open to the policy of migration. And they prefer certain selective countries whom they have good relationship with. For example, number of them like India, they have good relationship with. Very important characteristic, however, of this type of south-north migration is that it is highly selective. It is highly selective. This migration stream has developed after 1970s. After 1970s. So it is essentially what? It is highly selective. Highly selective in the sense only well qualified professionals are allowed to become the future citizens. Well qualified professionals. So you can understand these well qualified professionals kaun se honge? Engineers, doctors. Okay? So well qualified professionals, because these are the services which every country require. So this is one of the streams which is now developing. It has become more dominant after 1990s. Started in 1970s and it has become more dominant in the 1990s as countries find it more and more acute shortage of people. So that is one type of such migration stream. Similarly, other type of such migration stream is some south-south migration also has occurred. And if you talk about this south-south migration which has occurred, very importantly, one case of this south-south migration is the migration which is occurring within Middle East. So what is the destination? Destination countries include countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Number of these countries are there, and what is very important thing about these countries, they are allowing other fellow Arabian. This is taking place from the other countries of Arabia. Okay? So source is what? The source countries are the other Arabian nations. Why? Because the culture is same. Now, why they require this type of people? Again, this is also highly selective. Highly selective. So, you can understand one very important thing. that these are the countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, many of these countries, now they understand today very properly that in future oil will not remain the most important energy resource. The level of standard of living they have enjoyed in recent times, it has been because of the strategic resource of oil that they have had. Now they have the advantage, they have the capital. But they are very well aware that if they do not use this advantage now and prepare for the future, their status would not remain. So what has happened, these countries have now begun to diversify their economy. So you know very well, like development, airlines for example is one sector, hospitality sector has been one sector which they have developed, tourism, airlines. So such type of sectors they are developing. Now in these sectors there is huge demand for doctors, engineers, very skilled professionals. And such skilled professionals are in short supply in their own nation. As a result of which what they are doing, they are allowing such type of selective migration to take place from other countries. But very clearly you can understand this is again restricted on the basis of race, religion and culture. They do not allow everybody to have there. Some of these other source nations are the Muslims from other countries. It is basically what? The criteria is religion and skill is the main criteria. Like for example, you know, some of the Indians have also settled there. They are aspiring to become the potential citizens. But they are not giving to everybody, they are just giving to the highly skilled Islamic migrants. So this type of three streams of migration we have seen in this first category. Then comes the second one where there is temporary work permit. Case of temporary work permit. So when there is the case of temporary work permit, can I say who requires more laborers? Can I say again it is North? The North countries require labor, they have shortage of labor. So you tell me, can I say in this case also, can I say the main destination region would be many types and source? One important destination has been the North, and North has seen labor coming from South. The most dominant stream in this migration has been South to North migration. South to North migration. Can I say North वाली countries same होंगी जो अभी हमने बात की थी? These North countries would be same. There would not be change in them. These are the countries who have got the opportunities. South countries, you tell me, can I say so many South countries are aspiring? Like for example, इसमें अगर हम कुछ streams की बात करें, तो number of streams are there. Like for example, अभी हमने देखा था Mexico to USA. You can see. This is between 1980 to 2010, this period. So can you see from Mexico, and this is just we are talking about legal migration from Middle and South Americas to United States. So you can see that largest has occurred from where? From Mexico, biggest stream of migration. But can you see there are other streams of migration as well which have taken place? Like for example, streams which are there from El Salvador, Guatemala, others like if you talk about Nicaragua, Honduras, importantly from Colombia, from Cuba, from Haiti, Dominican Republic, Venezuela से एक weak stream है, Panama से there is 1 weak stream, so many streams are there of migration, this legal migration which is there. So one very important area, can I say Mexico to US, also from other other Latin America, you're right. Latin America to USA. This is one of the most important stream, because in these countries there are lower jobs as well, and lower jobs, so many people they require. Their own natives are not ready to do these lower jobs. But these lower jobs have to be done also, the unskilled jobs. So who would be doing unskilled job? The most nearest neighbors, from there this type of migration is allowed. In fact, बाद में देखेंगे, in fact you can understand, majority of these people which are entering into US, later these people become the illegal migrants, as their work permits expire and they do not return back to their country. They are whatever, they can be called illegal or whatever, but you can understand how much important source of change in demography they are for country like US. Because of these people, हमने देखा है that US TFR was 1.9, ठीक है, which was, otherwise it would have been near to Europe, which is 1.6, ठीक है, which is very, very low. So that is one of the reason US, you can understand, has been able to maintain its dominance in the geopolitical affairs of the world. You can see Europe का geopolitical dominance almost खत्म हो गया. Europe is not the dominating like it was in the past. ठीक है? So that is one of the very, very important streams. Similar type of streams are there also. Like for example, one important stream is from North Africa to Western Europe. And इस Western Europe में भी सबसे ज़्यादा important है Mediterranean Europe. Mediterranean Europe. Like for example, बहुत सारे countries मिलेंगे. Like you take the case of Algeria, Morocco. So Algeria and Morocco were basically what? They were colonies of France. And majority of migration which occurs, it is from Algeria to France, Morocco to France. ठीक है? क्योंकि बहुत सारे फैक्टर्स हो जाएंगे. वहां पर इंग्लिश के बजाय फ्रेंच in that colony would have been an important language. People would be knowing French. So they would find it easier to get assimilated in the French culture rather than in other form of cultures. ठीक है? Similarly, another such type of migration is जो अभी हमने देखा from Central Asia and Eastern Europe. Which Eastern Europe? Developing Eastern Europe. Developing Eastern Europe towards developing Eastern European countries भी हैं, like Turkey is considered as a European country, but it is what? It is a developing European country rather than a developed European country. ठीक है? So if you talk about from Central Asia and Eastern Europe towards again West Europe, this is another very important stream of migration. This same thing इस वेस्ट यूरोप में इंक्लूडेड है. इसको मैं अलग से भी लिख सकता हूं. I can also say that there is towards Russia. Russia. It is another important migration stream which is there. South to north migration. ठीक है? Can I say in recent times there is also emergence of other important streams where we find that the source regions has been China and India. China and India. And this from China and India is taking place where? It is taking place towards the developed world, all countries of developed world now. Earlier, before 70s, like for example, India का केस लेंगे, तो we will see before 70s, the migration from India was restricted to English-speaking nations. Mainly Britain, Canada, US. But what has happened? After 70s, it has diversified more. More specifically, after 90s, there is huge diversification in the directions in which now the Indians are moving. So all of the countries of Europe now, Indians are moving. Indians are moving towards Australia, New Zealand. That is another destination which has emerged. Okay? Even in East Asia like Japan. So what is happening? It is towards the, again, the first world. This migration is towards the first world countries. Okay? So this is the case of such legal, if you talk about migration, where it is for temporary work permit. So that is one case. Then इस तरह का migration is also taking place in south migration. South migration, and number of such south migrations are occurring. Like for example, one case of this south migration is that from other countries of Islamic realm, other countries of Islamic realm towards Middle East. Other countries of the Islamic realm towards the Middle East countries. So this is one of the important stream of migration which has been there. So you know that from India, हमने पहले भी बात किया, from Kerala for example, a very big stream of migration goes towards Middle East, where number of countries, biggest if recipient of Indians is UAE, followed by Oman, followed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Okay? So again what we find that from number of countries. So इसमें India हो जाएगा, Indonesia हो जाएगा, Pakistan, Afghanistan, several countries. Now Afghanistan से restrict कर दिया because of the terrorism and all those factors. But still they allow the migrants. In recent times इस migration trend में थोड़ा change आया जो अभी हमने देखा, that even now they are earlier, if you talk about, it was only basically which type? It was only related with the unskilled migrants, unskilled and semi-skilled migrants. Mostly they were going there. But now the texture is changing, and the texture is also that skilled migrants are also moving in this direction. Okay? And we see that actually it is not only now, if you look into the cases of Islamic migrants, some of the other religion migrants, skilled migrants are also going, because there is huge lucrative jobs there. And these countries require such technical professionals. Okay? So that is one of the south stream of migration. Then there are others also. Like one important is the destination, if we talk about, and the destination nation is Chile. Chile has number of mines, Iquique, Antofagasta, so many mining centers. And in these mining centers, they require cheap labor. So again, what we find, this cheap labor is coming from where? It is coming from neighboring poor countries, like you can see that, like for example, Bolivia. Okay? So it is coming from neighboring Latin American countries like Colombia, Peru, etc. So they are supplying these migrants to Chile to work in the mine. So that is one important stream of migration of this type. Similar type of stream of migration, the destination regions are Zimbabwe, and South Africa. See, देखो अब साउथ अफ्रीका को लेकर के थोड़ा सा कंफ्यूजन है, बिकॉज मेनी ऑफ द फॉर्मर टेक्स्ट वुड कॉल साउथ अफ्रीका एज नॉर्थ, बट साउथ अफ्रीका का जो प्रेजेंट कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स है दे आर मोर लाइक साउथ. ठीक है. Why they were being called as north? Because there was white population which was living there. But the present, if you talk about in the economic characteristic, it is more related with south. That is why I am keeping here in south. So if you talk about what is taking place, from where this is coming from, Central and Southern Africa. नहीं, इकोनॉमिक कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स के हिसाब से, डेवलपमेंट कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स के हिसाब से. सो सेंट्रल एंड साउथ अफ्रीका, number of like Botswana, Zaire, number of countries are the supplier countries which are providing them these type of migrants. So this is one important stream of migration which has been taking place. ठीक है. So this is one form of international migration which is occurring south to south migration. Again, it is for temporary period, not for very long period. Again, there is one north to south migration which is a very weak stream, which is simply a counter stream. ठीक है. It is simply what? Counter stream. हमने देखा है counter stream is always the weak. जहां पर भी stream होगा वहां पर क्या होगा? There would also be a counter stream. So there are a number of people from the Western world who are coming to the developing world. Their objectives are different. Life के सताए हुए होते हैं. So again they are in search of peace, spirituality, and they come towards these eastern countries where Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. based upon such spiritualities they are trying to find out their inner peace. हालांकि यहाँ पर और सताए जाते हैं बाबा लोगों के द्वारा, but whatever, that is the case we find. So that there are weak streams also of such type of migration, but it is very weak. Then third category of illegal. Illegal migration. ठीक है. Now if we talk about this type of illegal migration, can I say illegal migration के जो streams होंगे वो same होंगे जो अभी हम बात कर रहे थे? Because one place has opportunity and the other place are the suppliers of people. So suppliers वही होंगे the over populated areas, and opportunities are present where? In optimum and underpopulated. Optimum and underpopulated areas में opportunities present होंगी. ठीक है. So this would very clearly mean that सारे जो streams अभी हमने temporary work permit में बात की है, ये सभी streams illegal migration में भी they would be there. So what actually happens that because there are restricted, अगर मुझे इसको explain करना है तो you tell me, can I say that because there are restricted opportunities or visas in destination countries, plus you take into account the factor of competing migrants, Stouffer का लॉ देखा था हमने. There is the factor of competing migrants. So because of this, what will happen? There would be number of people who would be left out. ठीक है? As a result, number of potential migrants are left out. So now they have two choices. Either they do not move or to move to other regions, but other regions might not have the opportunities. Second choice, however, is to move illegally. They have so much of problems that ultimately they want to move. They decide to move. So you tell me, can I say this type of illegal migration और जो legal migration, दोनों में फर्क है? ठीक है? ये वाला जो अभी हमने legal migration देखा, जहां पर we were talking about where people are moving with temporary work permit. Can I say this type of legal migration would be both pull and push based? ये both होगा इसमें. While यहाँ पर जो illegal migration होगा, ये कैसा होगा? It would be mostly push based. Because these people who are left out, इसमें दो तरह की categories हैं. One who are in acute needs of bettering their standards of living. Others who have a decent standard of living, okay, opportunity नहीं मिली, they will wait. ठीक है? They will wait, okay, next year मिल सकता है, after that मिल सकता है. But there is second category who cannot wait because they are very, very poor. They require money for some or other purpose. घर में लोग बीमार हैं, they require money for that. ठीक है? So again, what they would decide, no matter what, I will go, I will earn that money and then come back. वो बात अलग है जब when you go and you become habituated, you don't want to come back, that is other thing. But this is how this type of migration would be taking place. But very clearly the streams of migration would be same. ठीक है? So that is the case of the illegal migration. और इसमें illegal migration में अब थोड़े से और ऐड हो जाएंगे. जैसे अगर हम देखें तो some of the very potential illegal streams of migrations which are present are there in the south cases. Like for example, अगर हम देखें तो one important is Bangladesh to India. India doesn't allow, because India को जरूरत क्या है बांग्लादेश से, people are coming to work. India doesn't give the work permit. ठीक है? So इसलिए हमने वहां पर उसको mention नहीं किया. But very clearly what will happen, because of this there would be illegal migrants who would be generated. So that is one of the very big streams of migration which is illegally crossing the borders. ठीक है? So such type of migrants would be there. Similarly, others, like you take the case of Brazil, Argentina. Brazil and Argentina are the destinations places. And number of people are entering in these destination regions. Like for example, one of the important supplier countries are Paraguay, Bolivia. ठीक है? So number of them. In recent times, other countries are emerging like Venezuela. So they are migrating towards these areas. You know, Brazil में plantations are there. In Brazil, other things are also developed like mining. ठीक है? So several opportunities are there in Brazil. Same thing with Chile. So यहाँ पर इस तरह के stream में जो destination हो जाएगा, वो हो जाएगा Chile, Argentina and Brazil. Right now, Argentina is a weak destination because Argentina's economy is in shambles. But if we look into immediate past, 1970s, 80s, Argentina used to be an important destination. So similarly, in this case, there would be such type of migration. Same thing in Africa. There are some such type of areas where migration is taking place, जिसको हमने पहले mention नहीं किया था. One of such area is Nigeria. Nigeria is the destination country, and from the nearby sub-Saharan countries like Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, number of migrants are illegally entering into Nigeria. Nigeria also has lots of plantation works. Oil industry is developed in case of Nigeria, so it has good amount of opportunities. Okay? So again, some of the other streams are added when we are talking about the illegal migration. Otherwise, what we find that it is like this. Now, so that is the case of, all these are the cases of voluntary migration. Still people have more or less choice. But then there is a case of forced or involuntary migration. Forced or involuntary migration. And here we are essentially talking about the refugees. So, all the countries who are signatory to the asylum laws, international asylum law, they cannot refuse entry of the refugees. They have the right to ultimately dictate that the number of refugees they would be allowing to enter. But if the refugees are coming, if they are signatory, they cannot refuse them entry. And refugees कौन से लोग होते हैं? Those who are threatened for their life in their native country because of variety of reasons. These reasons can range from religious persecution, war, or even other natural events. Such type of people whose life is threatened in their native country, they are referred to as the refugees. And they are able to cross international borders. They are refugees. In fact, these type of people are actually of two types. One are the internal migrants, other are the international migrants. So refugees are those people who are actually the international migrants who have been able to cross the borders. But there are also more number of people are unable to cross the borders, and they are essentially what? They are internal migrants. And if we talk about these internal migrants, essentially these are referred to as the internally displaced persons. ठीक है, दोनों में कंपेयर करें तो you can understand refugees are the people who make headlines. ठीक है, they make the headlines. But who are living in more worse condition? It is the internally displaced persons, because refugees are given lots of support by the international agencies, the countries in which they are going, there is lots of support. So at least they are comparatively safe, comparatively I am saying. But the internally displaced person, they don't have the resources, they are still threatened. So their life is even more worse than the case of the refugees. But whatever here we are focusing upon the refugees, so we know that जहाँ पर refugees होंगे, same areas internally displaced persons भी होंगे. Because these are the places which are the trouble zone, either because of the natural factors or because of the man-made factors. So refugee generation, traditionally, one of the area has been Africa. So Africa में there are number of areas which can be said to be the which have generated refugees. One of the important area is the Horn of Africa. One important area has been Horn of Africa. And here the source areas are South Sudan, and another important source area has been Somalia. South Sudan and Somalia. So South Sudan has been very, very famous for number of problems. One important thing in this belt, it is sub-Saharan Africa, the Sahel belt. And Sahel belt has been very frequently hit by droughts. So there has been climatic crisis. which has been there in this area. Other type of problems has been there, like for example, very frequently the problems is in सब areas में बहुत बड़ा problem होता है. In fact, इस बार you must have seen that many countries have declared locust as a national calamity. So in these areas, locust problem is so much huge that they would come, they're like grasshoppers. They'd come and destroy the crops totally. And it is a very, very frequent phenomenon. So many of these are basically what they are naturally affected areas. This is the case both in South Sudan and Somalia. But South Sudan has other problems as well. You know, the problem of war with Sudan related with the sharing of the oil resources. So as the division occurred, we found that majority of the oil resources, they actually went into South Sudan, the oil reserves. While if you talk about the pipeline network, the infrastructure, it was mostly present in North Sudan. North Sudan was more powerful, it was more established. As a result of which, the people from North Sudan has been doing these atrocities into South Sudan for a very long period of time. Particularly, you must have heard about the area which is referred to as the Darfur, very hotbed of such crimes which have been taking place for a long period of time. So these have been generating refugees for very long period of time. And from here, we find that the source, from these source regions, the destination has been Ethiopia. The main destination of these refugees has been Ethiopia. Ethiopia is comparatively more better than these. Ethiopia has volcanic soil, fertile volcanic soil. You must be aware that Ethiopia is a lava plateau. So again, it is more fertile, and you know, Ethiopia has agriculture which is comparatively more developed, like several plantation agricultures like coffee production, very, very dominant, cocoa production, very, very dominant. Okay? So Ethiopia is comparatively more developed, better than these. So these people ultimately move towards Ethiopia. So one area which is very troubled, it is the Horn of Africa. Then another area which is very troubled, it is the West Africa. West Africa. And West Africa, number of the areas are there. Source regions बहुत सारे हैं इसमें. And source regions include the countries like Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, so many of them, the Sahel countries. And what are the destination regions? The destination regions include countries like Nigeria and Ghana. Destination regions are countries like Nigeria and Ghana. So again, if you look into why this is taking place, it is combination of the natural as well as human-made hazards. It is a result of the combination of natural as well as human-made hazards. So here, climatic problem is very acute. It is part of the Sahel. So Sahel, as I said, has been experiencing droughts for a very long period of time. In the past 2 decades particularly. Even before that, the Sahel region has been what? It has been experiencing extended periods of drought. So that has been one of the big problems in this area. Agriculture, etc. has not been so much successful. But there are other problems also, like if you look into other problems, many of them, one of the big problem has been in recent times the case of religious fundamentalism, which has risen. You must have heard about a movement referred to as the Boko Haram. So this Boko Haram movement has been prosecuting people in this area, because you can understand यहाँ पर what is the important thing here. It is actually a transition zone between the Islamic Africa and the Christian Africa. Okay? So this is an area where there is tension between the two religious groups. As a result of which you will be finding that there has been lots of religious prosecutions which have occurred in these countries. And that is why there is so much generation of the refugees in these areas. So West Africa is one of the hotbed of generation of refugees. It continues to generate refugees. Then another important part is the case of Central Africa. And here the source is the Southern Democratic Republic of Congo. Southern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, it is mainly the Katanga Plateau. Katanga Plateau region. So what is, from here the refugees which are generated, they mainly move towards Zimbabwe and South Africa. Zimbabwe and South Africa. So if you talk about why in Katanga Plateau, because Katanga Plateau has non-ferrous mineral deposits. It is very rich in non-ferrous mineral deposits. And one of the important mineral deposits which is found here is diamond. Diamond. This area is very important for diamond. And if you talk about diamonds, you can very clearly understand that to get hold of this area, to make this area continue to be troubled, there is lots of funding done by the diamond companies, big MNCs, and they fund the nearby warring tribal groups. Like for example, you will be finding that on the eastern margins of this area are countries like Burundi. Okay? So from there are a number of the warring tribal groups, and they are continuously being funded by these companies to keep on attacking this area so that this area remains troubled. They are trying to also get hold of the diamond mines. And when these diamond mines are in the hold of these warring tribal groups, what will happen? उनका requirement क्या होता है? एक दो चार बंदूकें, दारू वारू काफी है. That is their demand. It is very cheap for these companies. And what they would do, they would simply sell these diamonds, raw diamonds, very cheap to these companies. They would just polish them and ultimately they would sell it for very good price. You know, again, this blood diamond has been famously referred to as the blood diamond. And Kimberley process padha hoga shayad tumne. So the Kimberley process was against that, this blood diamond, that the countries would not allow this blood diamond to enter, because this blood diamond is the reason for the trouble which is there in number of areas, including West Africa and Central Africa. दोनों जगह पर diamond मिलते हैं. So in Africa, this is the areas from where the refugees are generated, and these are the main source regions. Same thing, another important area for generation of refugees has been Middle East. ऑलरेडी हमने रेफ्यूजीज देखा, पैलेस्टीनियन फर्स्ट स्टार्ट हुआ यहाँ से. देखो वहीं पे सारा प्रॉब्लम स्टार्ट होता है, प्रेजेंट टेररिज्म. इफ यू लुक इनटू, इट वाज अ वेरी पीसफुल रीजन. यू मस्ट हैव नोन ईरान का, यू सी ईरान वाज सो मच प्रोग्रेसिव कंट्री बिफोर 50s 60s. अभी ईरान अमेरिका में देयर वाज कन्फ्रंटेशन बिटवीन ईरान एंड अमेरिका, यूएसए. ठीक है, ईरान ने भी रिटेलिएट किया. क्यों अमेरिका ने अटैक नहीं कर दिया? इफ इट वाज अदर कंट्री, अमेरिका वुड हैव अटैक्ड बाय नाउ, बट दे वर कॉशियस बिकॉज इट वाज ईरान. एंड ईरान इज एक्चुअली वन ऑफ वेरी स्ट्रॉन्ग, टेक्नोलॉजिकली ऑल्सो डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज ऑफ दिस रीजन. So they don't want to take trouble, because this war, if it happens, it would become very big. It is not Iraq. It is not Syria. It is Iran, which is a very developed civilization. So, Middle East की problems कहाँ से generate होती हैं? With the formation of Israel. And there it was seen, Muslims, they saw intrusion of Christians into their territory. This intrusion ultimately provided the basis for justification of the Islamic radicalism, which we see today. So the Iranian revolution which occurred, number of such things which occurred, they were in the period of 70s, 60s, 70s. ठीक है. So you know the Israel wars which were there, ठीक है, for the Golan Heights and all those the problems which were there. So it is from there all these things start. Otherwise it was a very progressive region. But unfortunately, once it has started, it has continued. So many events of refugee generations have occurred. Like हमने देखा first Gulf War. It led to generation of so many Kuwait refugees. Large amount of people migrated. Similarly, there was second Gulf War. अगर recent times में आए, तो there was second Gulf War. And second Gulf War very clearly occurred in Iraq. So from Iraq, the main, it has moved towards number of areas, but one of the most important migration has taken place towards Iran. Majority of the people, refugees, have went to Iran. Okay, some of them have also went to Saudi Arabia. Okay. So that is the case of second Gulf War. Similarly, in recent crisis of Syrian crisis, so the destination source has been very clearly Syria, and the destination has been, most important destination has been Turkey. Then other countries like Iran, Iraq, other countries. Okay? So again, the biggest recipient of refugees has been Turkey. लेकिन सबसे ज्यादा शोर किसने मचाया, सबसे ज्यादा वाहवाही किसने लूटी, that they allowed refugees? It was Germany. Some 100 people they allowed, and they became messiah of what was happening around the world. Angela Merkel was like, okay, she has become goddess. कितना बड़ा काम कर दिया उसने, refugees को allow कर दिया. सारा problem is because of these people in this area. Why you have to intrude in other people's areas? Why West has to intrude here? West से बड़ा terrorist nation कोई भी नहीं है. It is just that they have the technology to manipulate the viewpoints. They were living in peace, their civilization was flourishing. These people have radicalized. उनको बहुत फायदे हैं, resources यहाँ से अब cheaply मिल जाता है. You'll be finding that when there was this Gulf Revolution, which occurred in this period of early 21st century and late 20th century में. So, US, a country which is pitching everywhere for democracy, जहाँ पर भी है, ईस्ट यूरोप में वो डेमोक्रेसी के लिए रिवोल्यूशंस को फंड कर रहा है, और डेमोक्रेसी उसके लिए कुछ भी नहीं है, मार्केट बेस्ड मैकेनिज्म. एवरीवेयर इट इज फंडिंग दोज डेमोक्रेटिक मूवमेंट्स. बट जब यहाँ पर डेमोक्रेसी की बात आई, यहाँ पर वो रिवोल्यूशन ही क्यों था? इट वॉज द बिकॉज ऑफ टू प्रमोट डेमोक्रेसी, बिकॉज यहाँ पर ऑटोक्रेटिक रिजीम्स हैं. सो पीपल रोज फॉर द रिवोल्यूशन. वहां पर यूएस की बोलती बंद हो गई. यूएस ने कुछ भी नहीं बोला. यूएस वॉज इन साइलेंट मोड. क्यों? Because it has very good nexus with these autocratic rulers who are selling the resources very cheap. Saudi Arabia is what? It is like a puppet of US. That is why there is so much tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There is a religious factor, no doubt. So again, what has happened? It is all the doings of the West. So Middle East is one area. Similarly, Middle East का ही एक extension है. अभी हमने जो बात किया था अफगानिस्तान, and more than 1 million people in the Afghanistan war entered towards Pakistan. ठीक है. Similarly, there have been refugees from other places like Sri Lanka, and they have come to India. Mainly, you know, Tamil Nadu. It is the Tamilian refugees. Same thing if you talk about in recent times the Myanmar, Rohingyas from Myanmar. And what is the most important recipient country? It is Bangladesh. Okay? So at several places we find that there is generation of these refugees which is there. In future it is expected that, for example, Venezuela will become very big source of refugees. The economic crisis that is there in Venezuela, it is becoming very, very deep. As a result of which it is expected that it would become a very, very important generator of refugees. ठीक है? So this is basically the case of international migration. बंद करते हैं आज के लिए, अभी मेरी एक दूसरी क्लास है. Okay. Good morning, friends. So we were talking about international migration. So international migration from India. This is directly mentioned in our syllabus, paper 2. So we have already seen historically the international migration from India had been what? Low. And again, because India was essentially a traditional society, in case of traditional societies, the migration tends to be on the lower side. In ancient and medieval times, however, there was some important areas where some migration did occur. So India was in fact important destination rather than source, because India had very fertile soil, very good conditions. So lots of migrants came from Mongolia, as we know, China, Central Asia. During the same time, there were some outstreams from India, but these outstreams were more towards Southeast Asia. You can understand, if you go in Southeast Asia, you will be finding lots of Hindu culture to be present. And this Hindu culture actually migrated towards Southeast Asia in the ancient times. Also, it continued. Some of the streams, as once streams are set, the migrations continue. So it did continue even in the medieval times. So mostly towards Myanmar and Thailand. These were important destinations. Also later it was towards Sri Lanka. Tamilians where they went. In fact, you must be aware that when we are talking about the Tamilians in Sri Lanka, there are two types of Tamilians. One, Tamilians which migrated in Sri Lanka in the ancient period. It was very, very early time. So we are talking here about those Tamilians. Second type of Tamilians are those which were taken by the British later on. And they ultimately reached there as the indentured labor, जो हमने class में भी बात किया था, semi-slave kind of bonded labor. So that is the second group arrived in India. In fact, that LTT and all those problems which were there, they were more related with this second group, the later group, because the earliest group which came, it actually better assimilated, and culturally it became too much similar to what was the situation of Sri Lanka. So there was two type of Tamilians. Okay, coming back later to Sri Lanka of Tamils. In modern times, what happened? We find that during the British period, international migration did increase, and it was increasing because cheap labor from India was taken to work in the tropical plantations. Very clearly, that means the destinations would be towards where? Into the plantation fields of Caribbean was one area, Fiji, Mauritius, Indonesia, Sri Lanka. Okay? Like for example, you take the case of Bali. Bali is essentially what? Almost fully Hindu. Located in Indonesia, Bali Island. So they were mainly taken as indentured laborers by the British. Post-independence, again what we find, international migration has again slowed down but continued, especially to certain destinations. And if we talk about destinations, you have to understand, when we are talking about international migration of India, there are two phases in the international migration after independence. One phase we find is before 1991, more specifically 80s up to 80s decade. And second phase has been after this. There is some different aspects, different things, different characteristics in both these migration streams. So, number of them, for example, due to the efforts of national and planned development, skilled and highly skilled human resources were produced. So, the people जिन्होंने कुछ भी नहीं किया आज के हिसाब से, जैसे नेहरू, fortunately, unfortunately, Nehru built several institutions. If you talk about, for example, IITs was one of the institutions, several AIMS, etc. So many good institutions were built, educational institutions. And these, what they did, they essentially produced very good human resource. You can understand the time was such that India was, when this human resource actually came out from the colleges, ultimately, slowly they started to find out that we have very limited opportunities in India. Their talent, ultimately, which was there, it was not fully realized. Their potential was not being fully realized. So slowly we'll be finding, after 70s particularly, because by that time, the batches of these professionals who were produced, they started to come out. So particularly after 70s, we'll be finding that this migrants became very, very dominant stream. And clearly you can understand that they would go towards where? They would be going towards the developed world countries, the English-speaking nations. Abhi dekhte hain. So skilled and highly skilled human resources were produced, but they could not find expected employment opportunities within India. This led to outflux of these skilled people to the developed countries such as USA and Britain. It started in 60s, but it was more dominant from the 70s period. In fact, this is the phenomena, we call it as the brain drain. Famously, this is referred to as the brain drain. And you can understand this brain drain concept was more popular before. That we have to do what? We have to stop this human resource which you have created to go and ultimately work in other countries. But India very clearly saw a model which was produced by China. And on the lines of the Chinese model, we also started to celebrate these migrants in the form of Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Okay? So later we became more pro to this migration, because ultimately we realized that this migration can be very important source of remittances, very important source of several technology skills. Okay? Several migrants having entrepreneurial spirit migrated to different regions like North America, UK, Africa, several places. Like South Africa was one very, very important destination for the Indians. Dekho, what is happening is before 70s, more specifically up to, in fact it continued up to around 80s, there is difference between the people who were migrating to this developed world. And what is the essential difference? The essential difference is that these early migrants who went there, they were not these skilled professionals. These early migrants were people who ventured, and they ventured to ultimately start new businesses in these new countries where they saw some opportunities. Okay? So these were mostly what? These were middle-aged. Very important thing is middle-aged people who ventured into these countries, and they had entrepreneurial spirits. That means they wanted to start businesses. ठीक है, देखा होगा फॉर एग्जाम्पल वो कौन सी संजय दत्त की वो मूवी है चिट्ठी आई है वाला गाना जिसमें सो यू विल फाइंड दैट कि इस समय की जो मूवीज होती थी उसमें हीरो जब बाहर जाता था तो उसका एक दोस्त वहां पर कुछ बिजनेस जरूर कर रहा होता था एंड वन ऑफ द टाइप ऑफ वेरी कॉमन टाइप ऑफ बिजनेस जो होता था वो होता था रेस्टोरेंट देखा होगा ठीक है सो एक्चुअली मूवीज आर रिफ्लेक्शन ऑफ द सोसाइटी so that was the actual case most majority of the people who migrated they were middle aged people first what they did they first went by themselves they established their businesses and then they also brought their families okay so this was the very important stream of migration and majority of them also they tended to settle in these new countries and even obtain citizenship. So that was one type of migration which was taking place. Once they established themselves in destination countries, their families accompanied them. But what has happened since 1990s due to the LPG policy, the trend of migration has been changed and many new destinations have emerged. So one very important aspect of this type of migration has been that destination has changed. So earlier the destination was US, UK, Canada. They still remain the most preferred for the skilled migrants. But later on what we find that others have also begun to emerge like France. In recent times Germany has been very important destination, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. Several of these countries have emerged as important destination. Second important thing towards this direction, if I have to say, has been that the nature of the migrants have changed now. Characteristics of the migrants has now changed. And what is we find? Majority of the migrants now who are going there, they are mainly skilled professionals. Who are going to get some fixed jobs in these new countries, destination countries. Earlier it was the businessmen. Now it is mostly what? Now it is the skilled professional, doctors, engineers, nurses. There's so much of demand of such professionals in this developed world. Very clearly you can understand this type of migrants are just going for temporary period. With temporary work permits. Okay? So this is the main characteristics which have changed with respect to this international migration of India. But when we are talking about the international migration of India, we have to understand that this migration from, here we are talking about what? South migration? South to north migration. So south to north migration is one stream of migration. More important stream of migration is very clearly south-south migration. This is a bigger stream of migration, most important stream of migration from India. And definitely this south is none other than Middle East. So if we look into Middle East, most preferred destination in terms of numbers has been UAE, followed by Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain and Kuwait. All of these have been very, very dominant destination for the Indians. In case of Southwest Asia, majority of migrants were unskilled to semi-skilled. That is one thing. 1960s and 70s. You can understand why, because this was the period when these economies were based upon oil mining. So in oil mines there were low jobs which were required, which the natives were not willing to perform. As a result of which they needed people who could work these low jobs. Okay? So again, majority of the migrants who went during these phases, particularly up to the 80s, majority of these were basically what? They were unskilled to semi-skilled migrants. Clear, it is very, very clear that these migrants, even today, if you talk about, they were basically what? They were Islam. They were followers of Islam. Okay, Muslim migrants. Source, if you talk about from India, source was essentially Kerala. The most important source has been Kerala. So, however, what has happened? Since 1990s, this has changed. The texture of such migration has changed. One important change which has taken place is now there is greater number of the share of skilled migrants has increased. That is first thing. हमने already देखा है क्यों ऐसा होगा? Because their economies are what? In the transition phase. They require such type of skilled migrants. That is why the share of the skilled migrants has increased. One thing. Second very important thing is that if you talk about this type of migrants, there was a bit also control. The volume of migration has reduced. Okay? So what has happened? The volume of migration has reduced. Why there was reduction in the volume of migrants? One of the basic reasons for that was the internal restructuring which was taking place in these countries. And what was this internal restructuring? It was mainly political restructuring which has been taking place. So these countries have been managed by autocrats. They have been autocratic. Sheikdoms, in fact, you can say. So what was the case here? There was very high level of inequality. In fact, this inequality led to a revolution. We call it as the Gulf Revolution. So if you talk about this Gulf Revolution, so many people came out on the street in favor of democracy for tackling the problems of inequality which were there in these countries. Now, as a result of which the rulers of these countries had to take conscious step to ensure that the locals also get fair share of jobs and employment. And from there we'll be finding that what has happened, they have restricted the number of visas now they are granting for outsiders to come and work. Okay? That is one factor which has led to reduction in the number of people from India going towards Middle East. Second very important factor is the factor of competing migrants. So what we find now, that there is lots of competition for these jobs in the Middle East. So number of people even from other countries like Pakistan, Indonesia, other Islamic nations, they are also, because these countries also got independence, their institutions also developed, they have also been producing human resource. So their human resource has also matured, the information has reached to the people. We are living in information age, as a result of which now the competition for these visas has increased. So because of these two factors, we find that the total amount of migration towards these countries is not as high as it was used to be in 70s. The volume has reduced. Another change which has taken place is with respect to source. In India, the most important source used to be Kerala. But what has happened, as the information has diffused, today what we find, new streams of migrations have developed. Like for example, to the Kerala migrants, there is a stiff competition being given by the other Dravidian states, including that of Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana and Tamil Nadu. They have emerged as important source countries for such type of migration. In fact, some of the northern states are also today becoming a supplier, like UP and Bihar. From there also, although weak they are streams, but streams have emerged. Okay? So this type of changes have taken place towards this source in this migration stream. There have been other south-south migration streams, like one of the south-south migration stream has been India to South Africa. Particularly you can understand that up to the 80s it was a very important stream of migration. Clearly you can understand because earlier Britishers had taken the Indians towards South Africa, so already there was Indian diaspora present in South Africa. So already this stream of migration was present, so this continued. But South African economy has not done so well in more recent times. In fact, Indian economy has been doing better. So as a result of which what we find that particularly in the 90s and beyond, this migration stream has slowed down because of the lower opportunities now which are present in South Africa. Okay? So that is one. Again, another stream of migration in recent times which has developed, and this is from India towards East Asia. This is another new migration stream which has developed, more specifically after the period of 90s. If you talk about this migration stream, it is towards China, South Korea, Japan. Japan तो हमने already देख लिया, that was north. ठीक है? Others like for example Thailand, in Southeast Asia also. So what is the basic characteristic why this stream has emerged? You must be aware that it was first adopted by Southeast Asia. In fact, Southeast Asian tigers, which are basically Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. Such countries adopted this model in 1970s, and this model was export-led growth model. And with the adoption of export-led growth model, what has happened? Their economy began to grow at very fast rate. Same model was adopted by China in the period of late 70s and 80s. And we can already see China's economy has reached to very high levels. इंडिया को भी एशियन ने बुलाया था कि यू बिकम पार्ट ऑफ एशियन. इंडिया ने कहा कि हम फालतू के एक्सपेरिमेंट्स में नहीं जाएंगे. सो अगेन we believed more in our domestic growth because we were aware that our manufacturing capacities were very, very low. So we took this conscious decision actually to not become part of such organization. Whatever, but these areas, East Asia, Southeast Asia, it experienced very high economic growth. And because of this economic growth, what has happened? There has been lots of opportunities. The biggest barrier here when you talk about towards Southeast Asia, East Asia, has been that of language, the semantic barrier. But what has happened? Because these economies are now also becoming what? Global economies. As a result of which, consciously in their own country, they have worked hard to develop English language skill. Okay? So now when you go in China, you will be finding more number of people more familiar with the English language. So what has happened? This familiarity has also attracted Indians. So what has happened? Now the semantic barrier is less of a barrier because of the conscious efforts which have been taken by these countries. Okay? China desires to be a global leader, and for that it needs to be also, its human resource needs to be skilled in English. Because you can understand so many things. Internet is in which language mainly? It is English. Internet is the main tool today, main weapon of winning so many wars across the world. Okay? So they have consciously taken this step to ultimately develop the English speaking skill of their human resource. And that is one of the important factors which has attracted the Indians towards these regions as well. So though twofold factors hai. One is the economic growth and the rising opportunities, and second, if you talk about, is the removal of semantic barrier. Okay? So again, we find that from here the migration has increased. Since 1990s, there has been change in the age structure and the profile of the migrants. Now, lots of actually ये वाला point जो है, it should have come here. It is related with this. यहाँ पर इसके बाद था actually. So now majority of them are highly skilled and of younger age group, like engineers, doctors, nurses. This is one type of very clearly change which has taken place from international migration from India. So that is the case of international migration. Coming to the topic of internal migration of India. So historically, if we talk about international migration in India was low. Number of reasons थे internal migration के low होने के लिए. One very important thing is because India was a traditional society located in stage 1 of demographic transition. That is one factor. But the other factors are also there, like low economic development, lower economic development and self-sufficient nature of Indian village economy. देखा हमने, this was one of the principles which was given by Lee, with little diversification of economy on the national level. Lee ने इस principle को propound किया. When there is less diversified economy, what will happen with the migration? It would be on the lower side. देखा है हमने, इसको याद है? We talked about, एक example भी दिया था कि हम भी नंगे तुम भी नंगे तो फिर क्या फर्क पड़ता है? You go, if it is all agrarian and subsistence agrarian, then it doesn't matter why you will migrate, because you will face the same conditions which you are facing in your source area. So the overall migration, because of the less developed Indian economy, less diversified Indian economy, because of that it was low. There were other factors. एक और principle था, if you remember, given by Lee, and it was if the cultural diversity is high, then also what will happen? The migration would tend to be lower. So as Lee says that the cultural diversity affects, here we again find that that was a factor. High cultural and regional diversity along with prevalence of factors like caste, joint family, diversity of languages, traditional values, lack of education, semi-feudal land relations, all of these acted as what? Intervening obstacles in such migration. Also, there was political factors. India as unified nation is a recent phenomenon. What was the case? In the past, India was fragmented into several princely states, kingdoms, which restricted the mobility of the people, as there were political barriers which were the intervening obstacles. So all these factors ultimately meant what? That all these factors meant that there was what? Less migration. But what we find that post-independence period, migration from India has accelerated owing to number of factors: rapid diversification and transformation of economy, improvement in educational standards, technological development, very dominant factor, particularly the transport and communication technology, along with the structural changes in the economy. So, it was Britishers who can be said to be one of the people who unified India actually. One of the factors, history mein padha hoga, has been the railways. Railways has played very important role in the unification of the country. So, with the development of railways, people became more migratory. More migratory tendencies developed. And now other factor was very clearly the emergence of English language, which could be the common language with which people can do conversation with each other. These two factors have been very, very dominant factors which accelerated the process of internal migration in India. As India became unified, you can understand now our constitution guarantees us some rights that we can live and practice our occupation in any part of India. Okay? So again, it is a fundamental right. As a result of which, you can understand what has happened with this political unification, with this emergence of more literate people, more educated, more English speaking people. Again, what has happened? The migration in India internal migration has increased. Not only this, other factors like diversification, like you take the example of Green Revolution. So with Green Revolution, what would have happened? Can I say Green Revolution was based upon using several type of packages? Okay. It required lots of labor. It was labor oriented. So again, what we find as a result of which there would be the demand of migration of labor in these areas. So again, we will see that lots of unskilled labor went towards these areas. Okay? So if we look into the migration which has been taking place from India, there has been, अगर हम देखें तो since independence, total number of people who have been migratory, overall, migratory tendencies have been shown by them. It has been almost 30% of, one-third almost, 30% of the total population of India has shown such migratory tendencies. Now, if we talk about this situation, every decade, every census, we saw that overall the migration was near this 30%. This 30% we saw that it declined in the decade of 80s. So when the 1991 census came, which reflected what was happening in the decade of 80s, we found that there was decline, and it declined to some 26% around. Reason you can understand, as Lee says, even Ravenstein says, that it is the total amount of migration is connected with the growth of economy. So, 80s was a period of economic turmoil for India. It was a period of slowdown. So, as Indian economy experienced a slowdown, we found that the migration also slowed down. But after 1991, our economic reforms, and what we find that the migration has again picked up. So what we found in 2001, again the migration was somewhere in the range of this much people for the decade we are talking about. That is almost 30% of the population which was migrated. So what we find, it picked up in 2001 census. 2011 सेंसस में माइग्रेशन का डाटा अभी भी पूरी तरह से नहीं आया, एंड essentially what is coming, it is just coming in bunches, small. But one thing is very, very clear, as economic survey has told us, that there are clear signs that in the decade of 21st century, first decade of 21st century, the migration has further increased, accelerated. Can I say this was the period when India came out of the famous Hindu growth rate? Before, you'll be finding Indian economy was growing slowly. But it was the 21st century when we saw Indian economy began to grow at very fast rate. On an average, the first decade, the growth was somewhere around 7% to 8% even sometimes. So it was growing very, very fast. And this seemed to have also affected the total migration taking place within India, internal migration. Other factors are also there, why it would have increased in recent decades. Can I say? Number of factors are there. One important factor which we see has been that people are now more literate, more educated. Okay? So the total number of, you tell me, can I say, unemployed, educated and unemployed, has it increased? It has definitely increased. Agriculture today is facing more disguised unemployment. Okay? That means the population pressure in India has what? It has further increased, and this has made people more migratory. Other factors are also there, like the development of technology. Now if you compare it with what is happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s decade, there are better trains now, faster trains are there. Railway is still the most important medium of transportation. If you talk about, there are other factors also, like for example, the emergence of airways. Airways has played very important role in making people more migratory, particularly the skilled migrants. Okay? So all these factors have led to what? Increase in the total internal migration which is there. Also, Indian economy has further diversified. It has further diversified. Today there is various type of service sectors which India has entered into. Beside a variety of type of manufacturing has grown in case of India. So there has been what? Diversification of the Indian economy, which is another key factor due to which we find that in the 21st century, it has accelerated and it has gone beyond this 30% even. Okay? But whatever, there is some information that we have related with the migration which has been taking place. For example, you'll be finding that out of this total migration, 85% were intra-state migrants. Okay? They were intra-state migrants. That means within the state they were migrating. And if you talk about, इसमें 13 नहीं होना चाहिए, 15% होना चाहिए. Rest were interstate, 15% यहाँ पर. अब इस intrastate में भी what we will be finding? We'll be finding that which has been the most dominant, it is the intra-district migration has been most dominant. That means short distance migration has been greater. Can I say it is in line with what was the idea of Ravenstein? It is in line with the gravity model. Okay? So it is to be expected. Here, however, the main cause has not been economic. The main cause has been what? It is social, and again it is related with women changing their household after marriage. Thus, majority of such migrants were what? They were young age migrants. Okay? There has also been inter-district migrations. Here the objectives have been economic in nature, and clearly it is dominated by male. And here the dominance has been of rural-urban migration. That is towards the district headquarters. Some of the important cities. And interstate migration is very clearly what? It is the long distance migration. Main purpose economic, again here male dominant. And here what has happened, this information was given by 2011 census. And economic survey tried to analyze the ideas or the data of 2011 census, and it was found that today what we find that there is clear-cut emergence of out-migrating states. And these out-migrating states include Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, गुजरात, झारखंड, उड़ीसा, राजस्थान. गुजरात दोनों कैटेगरी में, इन माइग्रेटिंग और आउट माइग्रेटिंग दोनों में. We'll see. So there is basically what? Several out migrating states which were supplying important migrants, and there were some in migrating states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, These are essentially what the main in-migrating states of India. So there is now a clear-cut emergence of such kind of situations. Positive net out-migration rate has dropped compared to 2001 for high income states. Okay. So again, why? Because now they are more the destination. Some middle income states like Tamil Nadu, Karnataka have recorded the highest net gain of immigration. ठीक है, देखेंगे, you remember this Tamil Nadu, हम देखेंगे अभी growth जब 2011 census के हिसाब से, तो we will see that Tamil Nadu was the only state in the middle growth category states in which population increase was found, or the rate of population further increased. But it was not related with the phenomena of natural growth. It was more related with what? It was more related with the phenomena of migration. Okay? Similarly, another such set of middle income states which West Bengal, Himachal Pradesh have recorded slower growth rate of immigration with respect to 2001 census. Reason you can understand, because both these states' economy is now not growing at pace with the other states, other developed states. Third point, low income states, what has happened? General reduction in the rates of out migration, and reason for that is now their population growth is slowing down. So, but in terms of total number of migrants, it's remain high. So birth rate, it was actually related with in some that there was reduction in the birth rate. In some, same in cases of Uttar Pradesh and Odisha, it was seen. Maximum improvement was seen in case of Madhya Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir, which showed that net migration in negative in 2001 but positive in 2011. Okay? There was more immigration than out migration in Madhya Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir. So clearly what has happened, some of the economic growth has taken place, economic opportunities has risen in these, and also what we find that the factors related with the slowing down of the population growth, all these are there. After this, यहाँ पर जो लिखा हुआ है, this is more 2001 के सेंसस के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से डाटा है. ठीक है, 2011 में कुछ और भी चीजें आई सामने. In 2011, certain important other things which came out from the 2011 census, we find that the largest stream of migration was from Bihar to Delhi. Bihar to Delhi. That means very clearly Delhi has scored over Kolkata as the most preferred destination for the migrants from Bihar. Okay? Similarly, another important migration was from Bihar to Mumbai. Bihar to Mumbai. And then it was from Bihar to Kolkata. Kolkata has emerged as the third, it has become third now in terms of destination for the people from Bihar. Very clearly you can understand that it is all related with what? The growth of economy. Okay? So again, this is one important change that was found. There were other important changes. Some of these included, very important was that one of the streams of migration, which was a very dominant stream of migration, was migration taking place from Gujarat to Tamil Nadu. Gujarat to Tamil Nadu. Now, this migration from Gujarat to Tamil Nadu earlier there was a long held belief that one of the factors working as a kind of barrier to this process of migration, it was language barrier, semantic barrier. But this important stream of migration has shown that in India now language is becoming less of a factor in the process of migration, less of a barrier or intervening obstacle. Okay? So this is one very important data which was there. Also other things have been shown, like what has happened with the share of female migrants, particularly in the medium and long distance has increased. Medium and the long distance has increased. Reason, you can understand now female are more educated, the development of technology. Okay? In majority of these cases, we found that this increasing share of female are because of several factors. One, most important factor still remains, the cause still remains that women are moving with their husband or with their family. It remains the most important cause of such migration. But slowly there are other factors also emerging, and one important factor which is emerging is education and employment opportunities. Okay? So the share of female in the medium and long distance migration has increased. Now, another change which has taken place is very clearly that the share of young migrants has increased. That means the age of the migrants, the median age of the migrants has reduced. Earlier, again, like if it was late 20s, now it is early 20s. Even younger. People are becoming very migratory. Okay? So several things have been thrown to us by the 2011 census. अब इसमें कुछ डाटा लिखे हुए हैं, you can just see that why people were moving, reasons, work, employment, marriage, moved with household, education, business, moved after birth, several reasons are there. It is just to show that what are the important factors. Now coming back to this migration on the basis of the settlement type. Settlement types. उसमें जो डाटा दिया हुआ है 310 या 9 मिलियन जो था, it also includes the seasonal migration. ठीक है? Here we are just talking about what? The more semi-permanent type of migration which is there. So if you talk about in this migration and settlement on the basis of settlement type, we can talk about various forms of migration. One type of migration which is most important is the rural migration, which you can see it is almost what? 53 million people have migrated in this manner. Similarly, there is second most important stream of migration which is rural urban migration. Third is very clearly urban to urban migration. And fourth is urban to rural migration, which is the smallest stream. Okay? So now if we look into what is the characteristic of this migration, first rural migration. अब इस rural migration में already you can understand the most dominant stream is the short distance migration. अभी हमने देखा था this short distance migration is mostly what? Intra-district migration. And here the cause is social. For such migration, it is related with marriage. And what is the texture of the migrants? It is young females. Young female. ठीक है? So अभी देखा था हमने इसको. So this is the most dominant stream of rural migration. But there is also medium to long distance, now medium to long distance migration, it is essentially from the less developed states of India, which includes, the EAG states, Empowered Action Group of States, which includes your Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, Uttarakhand. Several states are included as a part of the EAG states. So this stream of migration, the source region is these EAG states. The destination, if you talk about, has been the green revolution zones. The green revolution zones. For example, one of the very dominant green revolution zone has been the Punjab, Haryana and Western UP. Similar type of labor, lots of labor is required in the Sundarban Delta region, Krishna Godavari Delta region. Okay? So it is, this migration is taking place towards where? Towards the green revolution zones. Okay? So that is one very, very important characteristic. Clearly you can understand this type of migration became dominant after the decade of 60s. Since the decade of 70s, this migration has become a dominant aspect with the development of the green revolution. So that is one type of migration. But still we can say rural is dominated by short distance. And so that is one. जिसमें लिखा हुआ है सब. Then comes the rural to urban migration. अब rural to urban migration में देखेंगे तो destination states में कोई ज़्यादा फर्क नहीं है. Destination कह रहा हूँ, origin states में. It would be the same. The states which are still in the second stage of demographic transition, वही वाले states होंगे. तो उसमें कोई फर्क नहीं होगा. Again, where this type of migration would be towards more urbanized and more developed states. So destination में भी बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क नहीं होगा. It would be Punjab, Haryana in the north. In the southern part, you'll be finding that it would be the south states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat. These would be essentially the main destination states, including also the West Bengal. Okay? So that is basically the case of the rural to urban migration. Now, if you talk about this rural to urban migration, what is the important characteristic of the rural to urban migration? Mostly it is medium to long distance migration. It comes under the category of medium to long distance migration. That means this type of migration is intrastate and interstate. Intrastate and interstate. If it is medium to long distance migration, very clearly you can understand, can I say that what is the characteristic of this migration? It is, can I say it is based upon economic causes? Economic causes, employment orientation is the key factor here. You tell me, can I say this type of migration, is it push based migration or pull based? It is mostly push based migration. We are talking about rural to urban migration. Agrarian distress is one of the factors. So it is push based migration. Majority of such migration is a push based migration. However, one thing is very clearly emerging, and this thing is that now we find that slowly there is also some pull based migration taking place in this case also. Now, why this kind of pull based migration? We are saying because now with time one thing is very visible, that agriculture is not very remunerative. Because of the agriculture becoming less remunerative, now the farmers who are the big farmers, the rich farmers, they can see that there is not too much profit in agriculture. So what they are doing now, they are promoting the future generations to ultimately go for education opportunities, go for employment opportunities, better employment opportunities which are located in the urban areas. So traditionally, if you look into, this migration was mostly push based, but now this migration is also becoming what? It is becoming pull based. अब इस point को याद रखना, because we'll see, जब हम morphology of rural settlements देखेंगे, तो we will see that there is in a village in India, there is a khas gaon. Khas gaon is the central part of the village, where we'll be finding the upper caste rich sections of the population live. Now, what has been very important phenomena which has been happening after 90s, it is that khas gaon is now getting deserted. Okay? There is a very important emergence of ghost houses. Houses are there, but people are not living. So why such a phenomena is taking place? Because now this rich section of the village is finding agriculture to be less remunerative. So either they are simply giving it on lease, or the Adhiya system which is working in these areas on rent, and they themselves migrate where? In the cities. Okay? So this type of migration is not push based. Gaon maybe they were living very well. It was the attraction of the cities, the pull of the cities which attracted them. So in recent times what has happened, the amount of pull based migration has been also on the increase. Okay? So that is the basic things related with this rural to urban migration. Now if you talk about urban to urban migration, it is another stream of migration in India. Can I say urban to urban maybe will we find that the source and destination would be same? The source and destination would be essentially same. Now what we find that important thing which has emerged in urban to urban migration is, in India now, the stepped migration process has been bypassed. Okay? There is bypassing of the stepped migration process. you can see these are the various classes of cities of India. So what is the growth of class 1 cities? And what has happened with the growth of all other classes of cities? It has remained stagnant or even deaccelerated. This very big gap you can see in terms of the growth which is taking place. Over 70% of people today, total urban population, it is living where? It is living in the class 1 cities. ठीक है, अब इसमें भी देखो, इसमें भी कैटेगरीज हैं. If you look into the total class 1 cities, total how many people are living there? .2% of the total number of people, urban population, it is living in the class 1 cities. अब इसमें भी देखो, total number of people out of this total urban population living in million plus cities, that is metropolitan. 42.3% of the people are living where? In the million plus cities. ठीक है, अब उसमें भी देखो कैटेगरीज. Cities which have population of more than 10 million. There are 3 cities in India: Greater Mumbai, Delhi and Kolkata. And if we look into these 3 cities, out of the total urban population, 13% of the people were living where? In just 3 cities of India. ठीक है, 5 to 10 million में there are 5 cities which are here, and you can understand almost 10% of people, urban people, are living where? In these 5 cities. Then you can see that वो नीचे यहाँ पर 33 हो रहा है. 33, 1 to 2 million plus cities are there, and again we find that about 12% of people are living in these 33 cities. You can understand 42.3% of the total urban population was living in just 52 towns of India. Okay? So what has very clearly happened now, that in the urban migration process, there is bypassing of the stepped migration process. And because of this bypassing of the stepped migration process, what has happened with this type of migration? It has had an effect which we call it as the phenomena of metropolization. Phenomena of metropolization is dominant. ठीक है? So that is the characteristic of the urban migration process in India. Then if you talk about urban to rural migration, if you remember, हमने बात भी किया था इसके बारे में, अर्बन ट्रांजिशन के बारे में बात किया था हमने, याद है? So did we talk about the urban curve, जहां पर मैंने नॉर्मल सर्कमस्टांसेस में ऐसा दिखाया था? सो 3 फेजेस में हमने देखा था इट हैपन्स. So what we were finding, that as you reach the later stages of the urban transition, normally क्या होता है, if there is, it is not supplemented by international migration. याद है हमने बात किया था, मैंने 3 ऐसे सिनेरियोज बनाए थे, किया था या नहीं यहाँ पर? So if it is restrictive migration policy, then what will happen? Then this case 1 would be true. So why this case 1 was taking place? Because of this phenomena of urban to rural migration. It is referred to as, इसको 2 नाम देते हैं, it is referred to as suburbanization or it is referred to as also counter urbanization. Counter urbanization process. So what I'm just trying to say, can I say that this phenomena of urban to rural migration, is it a phenomena of the fourth stage and fifth stage of demographic transition? Can we say that? It is essentially tied with the fourth stage of demographic transition, which is characteristic of developed world. Okay? So it is a characteristic of the developed world countries, not the developing world countries. So you tell me, can I say it is to be expected that this in India would be slower? Can we say that? This type of migration in India would be slower. That is why we are saying that only 6 million people were involved in such migration. Okay? So that is basically the case of urban to rural migration which is taking place. Now, अब India में this urban to rural migration के दो characteristics हैं, or there are two different aspects related with this migration. One, majority of this migration is short distance. Short distance migration. That is the most important. And the medium long distance migration is weak. पहले इसको बताता हूं मीडियम एंड लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस. बिकॉज वाई इट इज वीक? बिकॉज इंडिया स्टिल लाइज इन द थर्ड स्टेज ऑफ डेमोग्राफिक ट्रांजिशन. इंडियाज कैरेक्टर इज स्टिल डेवलपिंग. सो इसमें कौन इन्वॉल्व होते हैं? मोस्टली हियर इट इज द रिटायर्ड personnel. Retired personnel in some employment opportunity. Like very commonly such tendencies are showed by people from army, military personals. They would very commonly show such tendencies. So you know very well they would take their they would complete their job at early age. They'll also get lots of money after the retirement, and many of them would prefer to go and buy either land in their village, or if some of them even have already got their land, so they want, because उन्होंने इतना travel कर लिया होता है, and so many things they have seen that they want to live a more peaceful life. So very frequently such type of tendencies are showed by them. They would go back and simply do agriculture in their village. That is one type. Okay? So mostly it is shown by what? The retired personnel. As we said, it is a weak type of migration in India, weak stream of migration. Now, short distance is more dominant. In the long term, actually it would not be urban to rural migration, because this migration is basically what? People living in urban area getting fed up with the problems and tensions or the low housing opportunities, etc., and simply they moving on the outskirts for new housing schemes. Okay? So you know the real estate continues to develop. So people are now what? Taking houses on the outskirts as well. Cheap houses are available, better quality houses are available. There is better connectivity with the outskirts, like construction of the metro rail. Okay? Several type of factors have led people to migrate on the outskirts villages. You can very clearly understand that these outskirt villages at this point of time they are classified as rural areas. ठीक है, when this movement is taking place, these areas are classified as rural areas. But in future, as the city continues to sprawl, as the city continues to grow, what will happen? They would become part and parcel of the city. NCR, this would be phenomena which would be common in the metropolitan cities, surrounding the metropolitan cities. Okay? So this is one type of urban to rural migration which is taking place, and it is the dominant form of urban to rural migration. Very clearly, as we said before, majority of these people would be what? They would become part and parcel of the city again. So it is not technically the same type of urban to rural migration जो अभी हमने developed world के केस में बात किया. ठीक है, ये वाला जो कर्व हमने यहाँ पर जो बनाया, it is not the same one because they are still part and parcel of the city only. So that is essentially the case of these migration streams in India. There is one more, seasonal and temporary migration भी दिया है यहाँ पर. So largest chunk in the rural migration seasonal होता है. So people would just go and work during the, for example, period of harvest. They would go and ultimately get employment opportunities, and they would again return back to their village. ठीक है? So that is basically the case of the seasonal and temporary migrants. कई तरह के इसमें migration streams होती हैं. Like one is from the subsistence agricultural areas towards commercial agriculture areas. Is an example of rural to rural migration. Like for example, from Bihar to Punjab, Haryana, Western UP. So that is one important case of migration. It is again what? Seasonal. So here you can see workers move from one area to the other with the objective of getting employment in construction works, agricultural fields, brick kilns, stone quarrying, fishing. Several type of opportunities are available in this. Also there is second important rural to urban migration, इसमें भी होता है, and mainly it is because of the wage employment which might be growing up in some of the areas. थर्ड, इसमें एक और तीसरी स्ट्रीम भी है दिस सीजनल एंड टेम्पररी माइग्रेशन में, एंड इट इज अर्बन टू रूरल माइग्रेशन. सो व्हेन आई वाज अ स्टूडेंट, आई गॉट वन वेरी गुड कुक एज अ स्टूडेंट. सो अपना हमने यहाँ पर मुखर्जी नगर में फ्लैट ले रखा था ऑन रेंट, एंड वी वर लिविंग, एंड लाइक यू पीपल, हमारा भी एक कुक आता था. बट साल के कुछ टाइम में प्रॉब्लम होती थी बिकॉज वो वापस चला जाता था अपने गांव. ठीक है, फॉर 2 to 3 months वो नहीं होता था. एंड वी वर सो यूज्ड टू हिज कुकिंग दैट हम दूसरा भी नहीं लगाते थे. इट वॉज वेरी डिफिकल्ट टू गेट गुड कुक, यू कैन ऑल अंडरस्टैंड. सो व्हाई ही यूज्ड टू गो? बिकॉज दैट वाज द पीरियड व्हेन there was employment in his own village. That was the period of harvest. ठीक है? So it is an example of what? Why he was living in the city? Because there was lack of employment in his village. He wanted to live in his village. Unfortunately, he could not because there was no employment. So forcefully he had to live. But whenever he got the opportunity to work in the village, he returned back. Okay? So this is one seasonal type of migration where people would be moving to their native villages, because in those periods mostly these would be associated with sowing period, or the harvesting is the most important period. So in that time in the native village also there is employment opportunity. So they will go back, live with their family for some time, and then after that again come back. ठीक है? So that is the basic case of the seasonal migration in India, seasonal and temporary migration in India. ठीक है? तो उसमें जो हमने पहले डाटा लिया था, this is also included. seasonal and temporary migration. That is why it was higher. So when we are saying 30%, it clearly includes the seasonal and temporary migration also. Okay? So that is the topic of migration. Now I'm going to stop. मेरी एक दूसरी क्लास भी है अभी.